She cheated on me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the watch on the nightstand, before the reality of it all settled into my bones. I had only been gone 3 days. A last-minute business trip. A few meetings, a couple of late-night emails, and a lonely hotel bed. I had called her every night, told her I missed her, told her I loved her, and she had said it back. But now, sitting on the edge of our bed, I could see the truth staring me in the face. It wasn't my watch. I reached for it slowly, as if touching it would make this nightmare real. The weight of it was solid, expensive, something I would never wear, something that didn't belong in my home. The leather band was warm against my palm, as if it had been recently worn. My stomach twisted. I could hear the sound of the shower running, the soft hum of Sarah's voice as she sang to herself, oblivious to the fact that her secret had just unraveled. I had come home early to surprise her, to make up for missing our friend's birthday party. I thought she'd be happy to see me. But now, I wasn't sure I even knew the woman I married. I forced myself to breathe, to think. This didn't mean what I thought it did. It couldn't. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it belonged to a friend, someone who had crashed here after the party. Maybe. Footsteps. The bathroom door creaked open, and Sarah stepped into the bedroom, wrapped in nothing but a towel. Her damp hair clung to her shoulders, and for a split second, she looked exactly the same as she always had. My Sarah. The woman I had built a life with. Then she saw the watch in my hand, and everything changed. Sarah froze. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint dripping of water from her hair onto the hardwood floor. Her eyes darted from my face to the watch in my hand, and I watched as a dozen different thoughts flickered behind them, calculating, scrambling. Then she smiled. It was small, hesitant, but I had known her long enough to recognize when she was trying to regain control of a situation. "You're home early," she said, voice light, as if this were nothing more than a pleasant surprise. I didn't answer. I just held up the watch between us like an accusation. Something in her expression faltered. "What's that? You tell me." My voice was quiet, but I could feel the anger building underneath. A slow, simmering rage that threatened to spill over. Sarah's lips parted slightly, then pressed into a thin line. "Oh, that must be Mark. A mutual friend. Someone she had known since college, someone we both saw at parties and game nights. It was a good choice, plausible, just close enough to be believable. Except it wasn't. I let the silence stretch between us, waiting to see if she'd keep digging the hole deeper. She sighed, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. He was drunk after the party. I let him crash on the couch. He must have forgotten it. I exhaled sharply through my nose, shaking my head. Mark wasn't at the party. Her breath hitched. Gotcha. I hadn't even meant to set a trap. The lie had just come so naturally to her that she hadn't thought twice before spinning it. Her face paled, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "No, I meant..." "Don't." I cut her off. "Don't make this worse." I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to gauge how much I knew, whether she could still twist the story into something that would make me doubt myself. The thing was, I wanted to doubt myself. I wanted her to give me some absurd explanation that made sense, something that would allow me to pretend this wasn't happening. But she had already lost. Because now I could see it, the slight panic in her movements, the way she clutched the towel around her as if it could shield her from the truth. Someone had been here. A man had been in our bed. The realization settled like lead in my chest. I turned the watch over in my hand, running my thumb over the engraved initials on the back. JR. I didn't know anyone with those initials. I looked at Sarah, waiting for her to say something, to fix this, to tell me I was wrong. But she just stood there, silent. And silence was all the answer I needed. JR. The initials burned into my palm as I stared at the watch, my heartbeat a slow, thunderous pulse in my ears. I looked up at Sarah, waiting for her to explain, to grasp at another lie. Anything to put this nightmare back into the realm of misunderstanding. But she said nothing. And then, like a switch flipping, I saw it. The resignation in her shoulders, the tightening of her jaw. She wasn't searching for an excuse anymore. She was deciding how much of the truth to give me. I took a step closer, holding up the watch. JR. Who is he? Sarah swallowed. She hesitated, just for a moment, but that moment was enough. It was the kind of pause that only happens when someone is weighing the cost of honesty. I already knew the answer before she said his name. Jake. The name hit me like a physical blow. Jake Reynolds. Her ex. I hadn't thought about him in years. He was one of those ghosts that every relationship carries, someone who had been there before me, a name I had learned to live with, A past lover she swore had been nothing more than a lesson in what she didn't want. I clenched my jaw. You're joking. She shook her head slowly, her eyes finally meeting mine. Daniel, please. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just disbelief, bitter and sharp. Tell me you're not that fucking cliché, Sarah. Tell me you didn't let him back in. I could still remember the first time she had ever mentioned Jake. It was back when we were just starting out, when love was new and fragile, and we told each other everything. He was a mistake, she had said, curled up against me in bed, tracing patterns on my arm. One of those relationships where you convince yourself it's love, even when it's toxic. I would have done anything for him, and he knew it. He strung me along, always keeping me close enough to hope, but never enough to be happy. I had held her then, kissed the top of her head, and promised she would never have to feel that way again. And now? Now she had brought him into our bed. Sarah took a shaky breath. It wasn't planned. I didn't go looking for him. But you found him anyway, I said, my voice dangerously low. She blinked back tears. He was at the party. I wasn't expecting him to be there, and when I saw him, I threw the watch onto the bed, cutting her off. And what? You just fell into his arms. I was drunk, she whispered. And I was upset. My stomach twisted. Because I wasn't there. She didn't answer. I let out a long, slow breath, dragging a hand down my face. I had known this trip bothered her. She had made little comments about how I was always working, how I was never around when she needed me. But I never thought. No, this wasn't my fault. I wouldn't let her twist it into that. I took a step back, shaking my head. How long? Sarah stiffened. It was just that night. I narrowed my eyes. I don't believe you. Her silence stretched between us. And there it was. Not just one night. Not just a mistake. Something deeper. Something that had been building behind my back. I turned toward the closet, grabbing my suitcase, the same one I had just unpacked hours ago. My hands moved on autopilot, shoving clothes inside. What are you doing? Sarah's voice cracked. I didn't look at her. What does it look like? Daniel, wait. She rushed forward, grabbing my arm. Please. We need to talk about this. I yanked away from her touch. You had plenty of time to talk, Sarah. Instead, you fucked your ex. She winced like I had slapped her. Good. She deserved worse. I zipped the suitcase and turned toward the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get out before the walls closed in completely. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice shaking. I love you. I stopped in the doorway. The words should have meant something, but all I felt was empty. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance at her over my shoulder. No, I said. You don't. And then I walked out. The night air was cold against my skin as I stepped outside, my suitcase rattling against the pavement. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying every moment of our relationship through the cracked lens of betrayal. Jake Reynolds. Of all the people she could have chosen, it had to be him. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. My hands clenched around the handle of my suitcase as I climbed into my car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I sat there for a moment, the silence in the car deafening. I could turn the key, drive off, disappear for the night. But something inside me resisted. Walking away meant giving her the power. It meant letting her control the narrative, letting her cry to our friends about how it was just a mistake, how I had been too busy with work to see how lonely she was. No, not this time. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady despite the rage pulsing through me. I scrolled through my apps until I found the one I had installed months ago, security cameras. Sarah didn't know I had set them up. I had done it after our home was broken into last year, a decision she barely paid attention to at the time. It's a waste of money, she had said, rolling her eyes. But now? Now they were my weapon. I tapped the screen, pulling up the footage from the last 3 days. The cameras weren't inside the bedroom, but the hallway, the living room, the front door, they told me everything I needed to know. I fast-forwarded through the first night. Nothing unusual. Sarah coming home from the party alone, pacing, pouring herself a drink. Then, at 1:13 a.m., the front door opened. Jake. I froze as I watched him step inside, casual as anything, like he belonged here. Like this wasn't the first time. I fast-forwarded again, my stomach twisting into knots. The footage blurred through minutes and hours until Sarah, emerging from the bedroom, wrapped in my robe. She leaned against the doorway, smiling at him, saying something I couldn't hear. Jake stepped closer, and then I stopped watching. I had seen enough. My vision tunneled as I stared at the frozen image of them together. The intimacy in their body language. The ease. This wasn't just a mistake. This was familiarity. A slow, measured breath escaped my lips. I could feel my heart pounding, but it wasn't panic. It was clarity. I saved the footage. Then, for the first time since I found that goddamn watch, I smiled. Sarah thought she could lie her way out of this. She thought she could cry, say the right words, make me question myself. But she had no idea. Because now I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to end this on my terms. I didn't drive away. Not yet. Instead, I sat there in the car, gripping my phone, replaying everything I had just seen in my mind. Sarah, standing in our doorway, wrapped in my robe. Jake stepping closer, the tension thick between them. It wasn't just betrayal, it was history. A rekindled flame she never let burn out. And she thought I wouldn't find out. I let out a slow, steady breath. My pulse had slowed, the initial sting of the revelation fading into something sharper, colder. This wasn't the time for blind rage. This was the time to be smarter than her. I looked back at the house. The bedroom light was still on, a faint glow against the curtains. She was probably pacing right now, trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor. Good. Let her sweat. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, Ryan. A mutual friend, someone we both knew from college, someone Sarah would never suspect was loyal to me, not her. I hit call. It rang twice before he answered. Dan? Man, it's late. I need you to do something for me. My voice was calm. Too calm. Ryan immediately picked up on the shift. What's going on? I glanced up at the house again, my grip tightening on the phone. I need you to throw a party this weekend. There was a beat of silence. What? A party? I repeated. At your place. Nothing crazy, just enough people to make it feel casual. And I need you to invite everyone. All our friends. Sarah included. Ryan hesitated. Dan, you're not making any sense. What? I'll explain later. I cut in. Just trust me on this. Make it happen. Another pause. Then, finally, all right. You got it. I hung up. Step 1. Set the trap. Now for step 2. I swiped back to my saved camera footage, my thumb hovering over the screen. And then, without hesitating, I sent it to my laptop at home. I wasn't just going to confront Sarah. I was going to make sure she couldn't weasel her way out of this. I would wait. I would let her think she still had control. And then, in front of everyone, I'd rip the mask right off her face. This wasn't just about exposing her. This was about ending her carefully crafted illusion. And I wasn't going to stop until she had nothing left. For the next 2 days, I played my part flawlessly. I went back inside that night, and Sarah was waiting for me, perched on the edge of our bed, wearing the same towel from earlier, like she thought a flash of bare skin would be enough to distract me. Daniel, she started, voice soft, rehearsed. Please, let's talk. I just stared at her, my expression unreadable. Then, I nodded. Not because I believed her. Not because I wanted to hear her lies. But because I wanted her to think I was buying it. And Sarah? She took the bait. She spun the kind of story cheaters tell when they think they can still salvage everything. How it meant nothing. How it was a moment of weakness. How she had too much to drink. How she wasn't thinking clearly. How she loved me. I sat on the bed next to her, let her take my hand in hers, watched the tears build in her eyes. I didn't wipe them away. I didn't kiss her forehead. I didn't do a goddamn thing except listen. Because I wanted to remember every word. Because soon, she would be choking on them. By the time I left for work the next morning, Sarah was convinced that things were fixable, that I would forgive her, that she had won. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The next 2 days passed in a blur of carefully controlled silence. Sarah still watched me closely, waiting for cracks in my composure, for any sign that I was still angry. But I gave her nothing. No accusations, no outbursts. I kissed her goodbye when I left in the mornings. I answered her texts with short but neutral responses. I even let her rest her head on my shoulder when we watched TV at night, though every touch felt like sandpaper against my skin. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me, every time she said, "I love you," I wanted to shove the security footage in her face, make her watch as the truth unraveled around her. But I forced myself to wait. Because once I set this plan in motion, there would be no turning back. The night before the party, I made the final move. Sarah was in the shower when I slipped into her office and grabbed her laptop. She rarely logged out of anything, and within minutes, I was in her email. And there it was. emails, messages, plans. She and Jake had been meeting long before that night at the party. Hotel bookings, dinner reservations, long, rambling emails from Jake about how much he missed her, about how he wanted to see where this goes. And Sarah? She had encouraged it. I think about you all the time. I can't help it. I don't regret that night. I wish we had more time. The words blurred in front of me. All the while, she had been coming home to me, kissing me, sleeping in our bed. My jaw tightened as I forwarded every last message to myself. Proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. I put the laptop back exactly where I found it, double-checking that nothing was out of place. Then I left the office, slipped into bed beside her, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, it would all come crashing down, and I would make sure she felt every second of it. The night of the party arrived, and Sarah was glowing. She twirled in front of the mirror, adjusting the gold necklace I had bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago, back when I still believed she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. "You sure you're up for this?" she asked, flashing me a hesitant smile. "If you don't want to go, we can just have a night in." She was still testing the waters, trying to see if I had really forgiven her. I forced a small smile. "No, I want to go. It'll be good for us." She exhaled in relief. She actually thought she was getting away with it. We arrived at Ryan's house around 8. It was the usual crowd, our friends, a few people from work, and of course Jake. I spotted him near the bar, laughing with a drink in his hand, completely unaware that tonight was his last night walking around so smug. Sarah's grip tightened on my arm when she saw him. I felt her tense beside me, but I didn't react. I just turned to her and whispered, "Relax." She nodded, swallowing hard. I watched her watching him, and I memorized the way her eyes softened just slightly, the way she wet her lips, the way she tried so hard not to look at him, but failed. It told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry. She was just caught. Ryan wasn't on it. He didn't know everything, but he knew enough. Enough to keep Sarah's attention away from me while I made my final move. He dragged her into conversations, pulled her into the center of the room, made sure she felt like the star of the night. And while she basked in the attention, I slipped upstairs to Ryan's office. I plugged in my USB, and I waited. Downstairs, the music pulsed, drinks flowed, and laughter filled the room. A celebration. Sarah was smiling, laughing, touching my arm like we were still the perfect couple. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, the entire illusion she had built was about to burn, and I was going to light the match. "Hey, everyone." Ryan's voice cut through the noise. The conversations died down, and heads turned toward him as he stood near the TV, raising his glass. "Before we get too drunk to remember, I wanted to do something fun. We've got a little video presentation to show." I watched Sarah's brow furrow in confusion. Then, right on cue, the screen flickered to life. And there it was, the security footage. Sarah's body went rigid as the grainy black and white image filled the screen. Our living room, Jake stepping inside in the middle of the night. Then the messages flashed. The emails, the texts, all of it. The room went dead silent. Sarah let out a sharp breath, a strangled sound of horror as the color drained from her face. Jake's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. And I just stood there, watching her watch herself fall apart. This was it. The moment she realized she had lost everything. And I had never felt so alive. The silence stretched long and unbearable, pressing down on the room like a suffocating weight. Sarah's breath hitched. Her wide eyes darted between the screen and the crowd around her, searching desperately for something. An escape, a defense, a way out. There was none. The room wasn't just silent. It was watching. Our friends. Her friends. People she had laughed with, confided in. People who had believed, like I once had, that she was a good person. And now, they saw her for what she was. A liar. A cheater. A woman who had brought another man into our home while pretending to love me. Jake stood frozen, his face twisted in horror. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on train tracks with a locomotive bearing down on him. Then the whispers started. "Oh my God. No way. She did this to Daniel? Jesus, Sarah." Sarah turned to me, her lips parted in shock. "Daniel." I lifted my hand. A simple gesture. A command. "Don't." She closed her mouth. I stepped forward, my heart hammering but my voice steady. Strong. "I want you all to see this," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Because for the past 6 years, I believed I had the perfect wife. The perfect marriage. But the woman standing here. I turned my gaze to Sarah, and she flinched. She's a fraud. Sarah shook her head wildly, eyes glassy with panic. No, that's not. I didn't let her finish. She told me it was one mistake, I continued, my voice cutting through her stammering like a blade. One drunken, impulsive mistake. But as you can see, I gestured toward the screen, where her emails and texts still flickered like damning evidence in a courtroom. That was just another lie. The weight of it hit her hard. Sarah staggered back a step, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She turned toward the crowd, searching for support. Please, it's not what it looks like. Her voice was shrill, desperate. No one spoke. No one moved to defend her. She had no one. Ryan, always the peacemaker, finally broke the silence. Jesus, Sarah, after everything Daniel's done for you? That was all it took. The dam broke. Unbelievable. She lied to all of us. What kind of person does this? Sarah's hands trembled as she turned back to me. Daniel, please. We can talk about this. Not here. Not like this. I tilted my head. Not like this. I repeated, a cruel laugh escaping my lips. You mean not in front of everyone you lied to? Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wedding ring, and held it between my fingers. Then, without another word, I let it drop to the floor. The clink echoed through the room, final and unforgiving. Sarah let out a choked sob. Jake, still standing dumbfounded, suddenly found his voice. Man, I turned to him sharply, and he shut his mouth. Smart choice. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as I rolled my shoulders back. Then I stepped past Sarah, past Jake, past the wreckage of the life I had once thought was mine. I didn't look back. Not when Sarah's sobs broke through the murmurs of the crowd. Not when Jake muttered a curse under his breath, realizing his mistake was now public knowledge. Not when my so-called friends shifted uncomfortably, their worlds tilting from what they thought they knew. I walked out of that house, out of that life, and into something new. Something better. Something mine. And Sarah? She was left standing in the ruins. Exactly where she belonged. The cold night air hit me like a shock to the system as I stepped outside, the muffled noise of the party still ringing in my ears. I didn't stop walking. Not when I heard Sarah call my name. Not when I heard footsteps rushing behind me. Daniel, wait. Her voice was desperate, raw. I didn't stop. But she caught up anyway, grabbing my arm, forcing me to face her. Her face was streaked with tears, her makeup smudged, her breathing unsteady. Please, she gasped. You can't just walk away like this. We have to talk about this. I looked at her. Really looked at her. This was the woman I had built my life around. The woman I had fought for, sacrificed for. The woman I had once thought was my future. Now, all I saw was a stranger. Talk? I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. You want to talk? She nodded frantically. Yes. Just us. No audience. Just give me a chance to explain. I let out a sharp breath, stepping closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You had your chance, Sarah, I said, watching her flinch. You had plenty of chances. But instead of telling me the truth, you let me sleep next to you every night while you lied to my face. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't finished. You let me tell you I loved you while you were sneaking around with him. My voice didn't shake, but I felt the rage simmering just beneath my skin. You let me plan a future with you while you were living a second life behind my back. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I never meant to hurt you. A bitter laugh escaped me. That's the thing, isn't it? You never meant for any of this to happen. But it did. I gestured toward the house. And now everyone knows exactly who you are. She sucked in a shaky breath, her eyes darting back to the party as though hoping someone, anyone, would come to her rescue. No one did. I still love you, she whispered. I stared at her, my chest tightening, not from longing, not from hope, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. No, Sarah, I said softly. You don't. Her face crumpled. I pulled my arm from her grip and turned away. And this time, she didn't follow. I drove aimlessly for hours, the adrenaline still coursing through me, replaying the moment over and over. The look on her face when the footage played. The way Jake had stood there, dumbfounded, like he hadn't expected his actions to have consequences. Good. They deserved to feel the weight of what they had done. But even with all the satisfaction, even with the public exposure and the undeniable proof, there was still something missing. I wasn't free yet. Not entirely. So I kept driving. Until I reached the one place I hadn't been in years. The beach. I parked, kicked off my shoes, and walked toward the water. The waves crashed against the shore, the wind sharp against my face. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the last thing tying me to her, the wedding ring I had dropped at the party. I had picked it up on my way out, unsure why. Maybe for closure. Maybe because a part of me wasn't ready to let go just yet. But standing here, with the vast ocean stretching endlessly before me, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. And I threw it. The ring disappeared into the waves, swallowed whole by the sea. And for the first time since I found that watch on the nightstand, I felt lighter. I turned away from the water, away from the past, away from everything that had been weighing me down. Tomorrow, the real healing would begin. But tonight, I was free. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel room, the unfamiliar ceiling staring back at me. No framed wedding photos. No scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets. Just a plain white room, sterile and empty. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I sat up slowly, stretching the stiffness from my body. The events of last night played in my mind like a film reel, Sarah's face crumbling, Jake standing there like a deer in headlights, the way the entire room watched as I shattered the illusion she had so carefully built. It should have felt like enough. But there was still one final thread left to cut. I grabbed my phone, scrolled past the missed calls from unknown numbers, Sarah, probably, and typed out a text. Me, we need to talk. One last time. I stared at the message for a few seconds before hitting send. Then I got dressed, checked out of the hotel, and made my way back to the house that no longer felt like mine. Sarah was already there, waiting for me. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. She was sitting at the dining table, her hands curled around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked smaller, like someone who had spent the night unraveling at the seams. She lifted her head when she saw me, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. You came back. I shut the door behind me. Not for long. She swallowed hard. I was afraid you wouldn't. I pulled out the chair across from her but didn't sit down. Don't mistake this for something it's not, Sarah. I'm not here to fix anything. Her shoulders slumped. Then why are you here? I exhaled slowly. Because I want to end this properly. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to say it outright. As if, deep down, she had still held on to some shred of hope that I would come back, that I would forgive. I didn't. I never would. I'm filing for divorce, I said plainly. She flinched like I had struck her. Daniel. I held up a hand. No more lies. No more excuses. No more us. She blinked rapidly, her hands trembling around the mug. You're really doing this? I am. A heavy silence settled between us. Finally, she let out a choked laugh, shaking her head. I thought I could fix this. I arched a brow. Fix what, Sarah? The fact that you cheated? The fact that you've been lying for months? Or the fact that I caught you? She closed her eyes, her breathing unsteady. I don't know. I let the words hang between us, the weight of them pressing down like an unbearable truth. Then, finally, she looked at me again. I know I can't undo this, she whispered. But I want you to know that I did love you. I tilted my head, studying her. No, Sarah. You love the idea of me. Of us. But love? Love doesn't do what you did. She let out a shuddering breath. I don't know how to be without you. That was the thing, wasn't it? Sarah had always needed someone to adore her, to reassure her, to make her feel wanted. If it wasn't me, it would have been someone else. And now? Now, she had no one. I pushed a single piece of paper toward her, the preliminary divorce agreement. You'll get the official documents soon. Sign them. No fighting, no dragging this out. Her hands trembled as she reached for the paper, her gaze flicking up to mine. And after that? I didn't hesitate. After that, you'll never see me again. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. I stood, pushing the chair back. And then, for the last time, I walked away from her. This time for good. I didn't look back. Not when I walked out of that house for the last time. Not when Sarah's quiet sobs echoed behind me. Not when I got into my car and drove away, leaving behind the ruins of a life I had once believed in. By the time I reached my hotel, I felt empty. Not broken. Not angry. Just hollow, like I had been carrying something heavy for so long that now, without it, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the divorce papers she hadn't even tried to argue against. It was almost funny. All those years. The love, the laughter, the promises. And in the end, all it took was a single signature to erase it. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, stayed late at the office, buried myself in meetings and reports. Anything to keep my mind from drifting to the past. People whispered. Some of our mutual friends reached out, hesitant and awkward, asking how I was holding up. Others, ones I thought were our friends, stayed silent, unsure where to place their loyalty. I didn't care. Let them pick sides. Let them pretend they didn't see Sarah's betrayal unfold in front of everyone. I had already made my peace with losing people. The only thing I hadn't made peace with was myself. Because despite everything, despite knowing I had done the right thing, there were nights when I still reached for the other side of the bed, only to find it cold. Nights when I woke up expecting to hear Sarah's soft breathing beside me. Nights when I felt the ache of something missing, not her, but the life I thought we had. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning the illusion. One evening, I found myself at a bar downtown, nursing a glass of whiskey, watching the world move around me. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't hoping for some grand epiphany. I just wanted to exist in a place where no one knew me. Rough night? The voice was warm, smooth. I glanced up to see a woman sitting a few stools away, watching me with quiet curiosity. She wasn't beautiful in the way Sarah had been. She was something else. Something real. I smirked faintly. More like a rough few months. She raised an eyebrow. Want to talk about it? I hesitated. Then, surprising myself, I nodded. And just like that, I took my first real step forward. The conversation with the woman at the bar lasted longer than I expected. We talked, not about love or heartbreak, but about simple things, the best places to get coffee in the city, the worst jobs we'd ever had, the kind of music that made silence feel less lonely. And for the first time in months, I didn't think about Sarah. Not once. I didn't ask for the woman's number, and she didn't offer. She just smiled, finished her drink, and walked away, leaving behind only the ghost of a conversation that felt normal. And maybe that was what I needed. Not some grand moment of moving on. Not some fiery rebound. Just a reminder that there was life beyond the wreckage Sarah had left behind. A life that was still mine to claim. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Sarah didn't fight it. No long emails. No desperate calls. Just a quiet, mutual understanding that we had reached the end. I had one. But standing outside the courthouse, papers in hand, I realized something. It didn't feel like a victory. Because in the end, winning meant I had lost something too. Not Sarah. Not our marriage. But the version of me who once believed in us. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some people come into your life only to teach you how to walk away. A year passed. I moved to a new apartment, changed my routine, built a life that felt lighter. I stopped waiting for closure, stopped needing an explanation that would make sense of Sarah's choices. Because I didn't need it anymore. One evening, I saw her again. It was unexpected, a random grocery store, the kind of place where two people who once shared everything now felt like strangers. She looked the same, but different. A little dimmer. A little lost. For a moment, our eyes met. And for the first time, there was no anger. No bitterness. Just two people who had loved, and hurt, and ended. She gave me a small, hesitant nod. A silent goodbye. I nodded back. And then, without hesitation, I walked past her toward the future that had always been waiting for me. Toward a life that, for the first time in years, felt completely my own. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.